Hello, ladies, gentlemen, and everyone outside and in between the two, and welcome to the 2021 edition of Drag Me to Therapy. My name is Cyril Cinder, and I am a drag king and registered psychotherapist, and together with Capital Pride, I am here to talk to you about my favorite topic, mental health. Before we get started, just a little disclaimer. I am a registered psychotherapist licensed to perform the controlled active psychotherapy in the province of Ontario and am registered with the CRPO, or the College of Registered Psychotherapists of Ontario. So, while I am a therapist, I am not your therapist. Unless you also happen to be one of my clients and watching this video. And this video is not therapy. This video is for informational purposes only, and if you have questions about your mental health, please reach out to a licensed mental health professional or medical provider. I also want to emphasize that we're going to be talking about mental health for the next hour, and that means that we will talk about things that may be triggering. While I hope this video gives you a lot to think about, it's important that you take care of yourself and stay safe throughout this discussion. If at any point you need support, you can reach out to the Distress Center of Ottawa and Region by phone at 613-238-3311 or by text at 343-306-5550, or Interling, a 2S LGBTQA+ support line by phone at 1-888-505-1010, or via text chat by going to interling.co and clicking Need Help. Both of these services are 24/7 and open 365 days a year, so you can reach out and find someone supportive to talk to anytime. Now, onto the video. So, it's no secret, 2020 and 2021 have not been years that have been kind to our mental health. Our environments have a big impact on our mental well-being, and spending so much time in lockdown separated from our usual routines, our friends and family, and our in-person communities hasn't been an environment that allows most people to thrive. Living through the COVID-19 pandemic has been inherently stressful and traumatic, and it's a situation that has demanded us to engage survival mechanisms in order to navigate the risks and challenges we've been presented with. It's important to remember that our brain is a part of our body, an organ just like any other, and it's capable of getting sick too. That's why it's especially important now to tear down the negative stigmas that exist about mental health and mental health struggles. Stigmas associated with mental health issues stem from the misguided perception that those people are different from everyone else. But we know that mental health struggles are extremely common, just like other medical issues. Before the pandemic, research showed us that half of Canadians would experience mental illness before they were 40, with 1 in 5 Canadians experiencing a mental illness or substance use issue in any given year. Trauma is also shown to be a major contributing factor to mental illness, and with the trauma of the pandemic, these rates of mental illness and substance use issues have increased, though we're still waiting on the data to tell us exactly by how much. So, the numbers just don't add up. If more than half of us will struggle with our mental health throughout our lives, then it's a common shared experience among billions of people. That makes it normal. And while that doesn't mean that we should neglect it or not seek treatment and support for mental health struggles, it does mean that we're not different for struggling with our mental health. One of the reasons that mental health stigma has remained, despite how common mental health struggles are, is that for a long time there has existed a taboo when it comes to talking about our mental health. So I want to take a moment to acknowledge and thank everyone who's taking the time to watch this video right now. By being part of this conversation, you're helping dismantle mental health stigma and normalize these important conversations about how we can care for ourselves and others. If you feel up to it, let other people know that you're watching and invite them to watch too. But most importantly, show yourself some compassion and give yourself some forgiveness if you've struggled, whether that's been recently or if it was a long time ago. You don't deserve to feel bad for going through a hard time, whether you were or are experiencing a challenging life event, or the chemicals and synapses in your brain just aren't quite lining up the way they're supposed to. No different than if your kidneys or appendix were struggling to function as they're intended to. You deserve compassion and support from others, but also from yourself. Often, loving yourself means giving yourself what you really need, whether that's a break, a deep breath, or getting something really important done before the deadline. So, as we sit together over this next hour and take the time to reflect and direct our attention inward, I hope that you're able to do so gently, kindly, and with compassion. Treat yourself as you would a cherished friend, and avoid any temptation to talk to yourself in a way that you wouldn't accept talking to someone that you loved. On the subject of our brains, the pandemic has presented us with a threat to our safety, and our brains have some very old programming about how to deal with that. So let's take a look at how our brains work so that we can get a better understanding of how and why we've been reacting to the pandemic or any other major stressor the way that we are. Our brains are only a part of our body's very sophisticated nervous system, which is made up of our central nervous system and our peripheral nervous system. The central nervous system is made up of our brain and our spinal cord, and the peripheral nervous system is all of the other nerves that connect every single part of our body back to the central nervous system. There is literally not a single part of your body that is not connected to and impacted by your nervous system. When you were in school, you might have been taught about the sympathetic and parasympathetic nerves as being the two ways that your nervous system can be activated. The idea was that your sympathetic nerves were your fight or flight response, getting your body activated and ready to jump into action. And the parasympathetic nerves were your rest and digest response, where your body was chill and relaxed. However, in more recent years, there has been criticism of this theory as being a bit oversimplistic, kind of an on-off reaction that doesn't really reflect our lived experience. For example, it's really common for people with depression, who might be struggling with feelings of sadness, low energy, trouble thinking, and other symptoms, to also experience problems with digestion, because their system isn't working properly. So it's not exactly a rest and digest state, but it also doesn't really evoke the ready to spring into action fight or flight mode either. So while there are a couple of different scientific and therapeutic theories competing for dominance to find a better way to explain how our nervous systems really work, my personal favorite is polyvagal theory, and that's what I'm going to use today. I'm going to try to avoid overwhelming y'all with too much science today, but know that there's a lot more information out there that you could find if you're interested. So this theory says that our nervous system actually has 3 levels of activation, and that we can envision them as being on a ladder. At the top of the ladder, we have what is technically called our ventral vagal activation, or our safe and social state. This is where we feel calm and connected. We're able to be present in the here and now, and all higher brain functions are online. Now, it's important to reflect that we aren't necessarily happy when we're in this state. It's more about an ability to feel a full breadth of emotions, rather than just emotions that we would typically label as positive. For example, therapists are always trying to maintain a ventral vagal state of activation when they're with their clients, even when people are sharing something with us that's really painful. It's about our ability to be connected and engaged with another person and with our environment in this present moment, the here and the now. If you're familiar with the concept of mindfulness, here at the top of the polyvagal ladder is where you would be capable of experiencing a state of mindfulness. Ventral is not too much, not too little, but just right. The next level on the ladder, right in the middle, is sympathetic activation. This is our hyperactivated state, where we are ready to launch into action and respond to a threat. our body gets ready to mobilize. So our heart rate increases, our breathing gets more shallow, and our muscles tense. Emotions can become more fast-moving and even volatile. And in this state, it can be really hard to pinpoint and articulate what it is that we're feeling. This is where we see the body's fight, flight, and freeze responses come into play. Fight is where our body is ready to destroy the threat that's in front of us, eliminating its ability to hurt us because it doesn't exist anymore. Fight can bring with it a lot of anger, and it highlights the connection of how we can become quite angry if we feel threatened. If we don't go into fight, possibly because we know we can't destroy the threat, we may go into our flight response. Flight is our natural reaction to escape danger, to run away from the threat. And we can run both physically and emotionally, either by literally leaving and running away, or by trying to numb and distract ourselves. But if our body doesn't think that fight or flight will work, then we might freeze. Freeze can seem a bit contradictory, because while sympathetic activation in polyvagal theory is the mobilized state, freeze leads people to being physically and emotionally frozen. But I still put it in the sympathetic category because of the internal experience. Think of a deer in the headlights. Their eyes are wide, heart racing, unable to articulate what's happening, and unable to move in the face of danger. Freeze often leaves people feeling stuck, and this sympathetic state overall is a feeling of too much. Our last rung, here at the bottom of the ladder, is dorsal vagal activation. This is where we see hypoactivation, or shutdown. In dorsal vagal, our body immobilizes and starts to collapse in on itself. The breathing slows but remains shallow, limbs become heavy, and we can literally slump over. This is often a very disconnected state, as we separate ourselves from the present moment in an attempt to survive it. Whereas sympathetic had fight, flight, and freeze responses, dorsal vagal is defined by the collapse response. Collapse, also known as the feigned death response, is the body literally starting to play dead. This is a survival skill, because if we are being faced with a life threat, we are trying to conserve as much energy as possible while simultaneously appearing as non-threatening and as boring to the threat as possible. Think about it. This is literally what you were told to do if you were ever attacked by a bear. It's stronger than you, so you're not going to be able to fight back. It's faster than you, so you're not going to be able to flee and escape. And if you freeze and go rigid, the bear is still going to see you as a threat. You're supposed to lay down on the ground, go limp, and play dead. Exactly what dorsal vagal is going to get your body to do. In this state, every part of our body shuts down, from digestion to cognition. Our thoughts can become very slow and very depressed, and it's extremely difficult to think and feel things clearly. Often, dorsal is something highly associated with the experience of dissociation, and again, it is defined by shutdown, this state of not enough. As I was describing these states of activation and feelings associated with them, some of them may have jumped out at you as being more familiar than others. And that's quite typical. Our bodies and our nervous system tend to learn over time what we need in order to react to the unique circumstances and situations that we're facing in our lives. Sometimes our bodies learn to automatically jump to one of these states because it's what's helped us survive difficult things in the past. We are built for adaptation, and everything that we do is following a logic that may or may not always be readily apparent to us. We have logical responses to illogical circumstances. We move down this ladder in response to perceived threat, and we move back up in response to felt safety. There can be a lot of power found in growing our understanding of our responses because they're telling us what we need. So here's an exercise that you can use following this framework to gain better insight into how your unique nervous system operates and more readily identify what you might need to regulate it. If you'd like to give any of the exercises I talk about today a try, I recommend you do so after watching the full video. All you need for this exercise is a few pieces of paper, some colored pens and pencils, and a quiet place to think. Divide a piece of paper horizontally into 3 equal sections, one for each rung of the ladder, and label them. Think about sympathetic and dorsal activation, the middle and bottom rung of the polyvagal ladder, and ask yourself, which of these feels the most familiar to you? Once you've decided, pick a colored pen or pencil that represents that state to you. Choose a nickname for that state, which can be anything that has meaning to you so long as you feel like it represents this state for you, and write it at the top of that section of the ladder. In the rest of that section, write down whatever comes to your mind when you think about this state of activation. How do you feel in that state? What sorts of thoughts, emotions, or sensations do you experience? What is your relationship like with food in this state? What about alcohol or other substances? How do you feel about being around people in this state? What about being alone? And finally, at the bottom of the section, fill in the blank for the following sentences with how you would answer them in this state. I am blank, and the world is blank. Repeat this whole process from choosing a color to assigning a nickname and answering the questions with the other sections of the ladder. But make sure that you leave the top of the ladder, ventral vagal, for last. This is because thinking about these states can sometimes start to trigger our bodies into moving towards these states. So we always want to end polyvagal exercises off in ventral. Now, take a second piece of paper and divide it again into 3 horizontal sections, one for each rung of the polyvagal ladder. Put your nickname for each state at the top of its section in the color you chose for it. Then, under your nicknames for sympathetic and dorsal vagal, the middle and bottom of the ladder, write the word triggers. And under your nickname for ventral vagal, the top of the ladder, write the word glimmers. Starting with either the bottom or middle section of the ladder, write out some of what your triggers might be for this state. Triggers are cues of danger, either perceived or present, or agents that can disrupt our mental stability due to trauma or negative past experience. anything can be a trigger, and triggers often evoke very strong emotions. Triggers for sympathetic activation might leave you feeling overwhelmed, disrespected, frightened, or angry, while triggers for dorsal vagal activation might make you feel unwanted, left out, alone, or helpless. Glimmers are the opposite of triggers and are cues of safety or agents that bring us back to calmness. A certain perfume, a picture of a loved one, a favorite retreat. Imagining and revisiting these things can act as an antidote to the triggering elements around us. Personal glimmers help us evoke a feeling of connection, safety, feeling seen, joy, or beauty. So when you've finished identifying some of your personal triggers for sympathetic and dorsal vagal activation, write down your glimmers for ventral vagal activation. I've made sure to include hugging my partner and petting one of my cats, which are things that often help me feel more connected, present, and in control when I'm feeling overwhelmed or shut down. If you choose to do these two exercises, congratulations! You've done some of the work of mapping out your nervous system. You've hopefully gotten to know yourself a little bit better and have developed a tool that you can use in the future. Keep these maps for your future reference and use them to maybe identify what you might be experiencing in a moment of distress and what might be able to help you feel better. I often find a good exercise is to ask yourself at random points throughout a week or two, where am I on the ladder? Try to look at your behavior, your emotions, your thoughts, and especially the sensations that you're feeling within your body for clues. Practicing these skills at random moments when you're not overly upset will make it a lot easier to do this when you're having a hard moment and when you need that extra support. One of the reasons I really like polyvagal theory is that it helps us understand why something like the pandemic has been so challenging for our mental health, and not just because of the threat of being infected with an illness. You see, polyvagal theory also talks about just how much of our nervous system is dedicated to connecting with other people and other living things. And it's a lot of it. Think about it. We aren't really able to control impulses to express strong emotions like laughing or crying. The popularity of try not to laugh challenges speaks to how hard this can genuinely be, but it's especially hard if there's another person around. Comedy is just funnier with an audience of other people who are also laughing. And people are constantly apologizing to me for crying in therapy, which, by the way, is not necessary. Therapy is literally the most appropriate place to cry. We might also shake when we're upset, or turn red when embarrassed, or furrow our brow when we're angry. We do so much to always be communicating about how we're feeling, and it's hardwired into our bodies to be doing this without us even really having to think about it. This is because human beings are fundamentally social animals, with a biological imperative to exist in groups. We simply don't do well on our own. Think back to the examples I gave of my own personal glimmers earlier, hugging my partner and petting my cats. These are glimmers not only because of the pleasant physical sensations of a good squeeze or touching soft fur, or because of the positive memories I have of past hugs and kitty cuddles, but because of something called co-regulation. Co-regulation is a link between two or more living things that contributes to the emotional stability of those who are connected. Emotions naturally fluctuate for everyone, but co-regulation helps us navigate those natural peaks and valleys. Increasingly, research into parenting and education are highlighting the need for co-regulation for children through warm and responsive interactions that provide the support, coaching, and modeling children need to understand, express, and modulate their thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. But that isn't a need that goes away in childhood. We require co-regulation throughout our lifespan. Involuntary expressions of emotional distress are ways of signaling to those around us that we are experiencing this need to co-regulate. And while this is usually talked about in relation to our connection with other people, we can absolutely co-regulate with other animals, especially other social animals who have the same essential components of their nervous system that we do. One of the things that's been so hard about the pandemic is how much of it has cut into our ability to co-regulate with other people. We've been limited to who we live with, which is even harder when we live alone or with people who are unsupportive, and most other connections have been through a screen. While it's not impossible to co-regulate via digital communication, it can be harder when we don't have that ability to give or receive a hug or a supportive touch on the shoulder. Studies have also shown that our brains simply respond differently to video calls than they do an in-person interaction. We've been hit with this double whammy of being faced with the threat of the pandemic while also being cut off from so many of our supports. Lots of triggers and fewer glimmers. No wonder we've been struggling. This has highlighted our need to maintain social connection throughout this time through whatever means have been possible. Calling up a friend and talking on the phone is so much better than nothing. If we look back to our polyvagal ladder, there are clues about what kind of support or attention we need depending on where we are on the ladder. You see, if you're in dorsal vagal activation and you're collapsed, shut down, or immobilized, you want to focus on interventions that are going to encourage movement and build momentum towards becoming more energized. You can start by turning your attention to your breathing and trying to take deeper, more forceful breaths. So one way of doing this is intentionally sighing, sucking in a big breath of air and letting it out all at once. You can even get your shoulders into it or make a noise on the exhale. Try leaning into any impulse to move your body in a safe way, like shaking out your limbs or rolling your head. Playing music that you like to dance or sing to can be a great way to build momentum and movement in your body. Watch a funny movie with a friend and listen to them laugh, or just ask them to tell you about their day and listen. These sorts of stimulus counteract the collapsed and immobilized state, showing the body and the nervous system that it is safe to re-engage with the present moment, and that it doesn't need to be so shut down right now. If you're stuck in a more sympathetic state, then the same idea of trying to counteract that reaction applies. Sympathetic is about too much activation. So if you're stuck in sympathetic, you want to focus on things that calm your body down. You can take slow, deep breaths or try box breathing, an exercise where you regulate your breathing using the image of a box, imagining drawing yourself each line with a count of 4 as you breathe. So let's try it quickly. You breathe in, 2, 3, 4, hold, 2, 3, 4, exhale, 2, 3, 4, and hold, 2, 3, 4. Breathe in, 2, 3, 4, hold, 2, 3, 4, exhale, 2, 3, 4, and hold, 2, 3, 4. You can repeat this for as long as you like. You can also use temperature to help calm your body down, especially cold water on your face, neck, and wrists. You can hold an ice cube in your hand and let it melt, though it's very important that for this exercise you just use an ice cube, a normal ice cube, and not an ice pack, because an ice cube is going to melt before it can do any damage to your skin. You can also try lying on the floor or sitting in a supportive chair and focus on the sensation of the ground or the chair supporting your body. Talking about how you're feeling and having someone calm and supportive listen to you can also be really key. Sometimes it's a good idea to direct that energy towards something that your brain and your body can make sense of and will help produce endorphins, like exercise or dance. Every body is different and will require a personal touch and personal solutions. It all depends on what works best for you. Now, something that I want to take the time to acknowledge is that what we're talking about here are ways that we try to cope with triggers, stressors, and challenging things that we experience. Specifically, we're looking to build our resources and abilities to use adaptive coping strategies, adding tools to our toolbox that work and get the job done right. But it's important to acknowledge that we are always trying to cope, even when we do things that might hurt us, and that there is no such thing as good or bad coping skills, just adaptive and maladaptive ones. And something that's an adaptive coping skill for one person could be maladaptive for another. As an example, for some people, playing a video game is a great way to wind down and distract themselves. But for another, they could become really frustrated and hard on themselves when they struggle in the game if they're not in a good space mentally. And that's going to make them feel worse. Another person might find that drinking a beer at the end of the day helps signal their body that it's time to relax. But for someone else, they might struggle to stop drinking once they start, or they just don't like the feeling of being intoxicated and find that it makes them more anxious. None of these people are better or more moral and ethical than another. We often place really harsh judgments in society on how people cope with stress, but they're just different from one another. Even some of our most stigmatized attempts at coping, from substance use to self-harm to high-risk behaviors, are examples of someone doing their best to navigate things that are really difficult. And while, as a therapist, I always want to maximize benefit while minimizing harm, which means I'm going to try to help people move away from their more maladaptive coping strategies and move closer to their adaptive ones, that does not mean that people deserve to feel bad for struggling. And people are smart. We tend to know that when we indulge a maladaptive coping strategy, that it's going to hurt us and come at a cost. But at the same time, usually we are still doing it because it has a benefit, and we might not actually know what else would meet the need and really help us in that moment. Often I hear people express that they know that going for a walk or talking to a friend would help, but that they don't do it, and experience intense shame like it's their fault. We might say similar things in frustration to ourselves about eating healthier or getting up earlier in the morning. But often an important question that people neglect to ask themselves is, what is getting in the way? And I mean that honestly, without judgment. What is getting in the way? Take the morality out of it and try as much as possible to look at the matter openly. Why am I struggling to wake up earlier? Do I stay up late because that's the only personal time I really have? Am I avoiding something that's more present in the mornings? Am I not naturally a morning person and experience physical barriers? What about, eating healthier, a pretty nebulous goal? Am I facing financial barriers to procuring healthy food? What about time barriers to actually prepare that food? Do I know how to prepare healthy food and what that even means? Do I know how to prepare healthy food that I enjoy and gives me pleasure? And if I'm using maladaptive coping skills, what is getting in the way of my using adaptive ones? Do they have the same level of payoff in the same amount of time? Do I trust that they will actually work and that I will actually feel better? Do I believe that I deserve to access these adaptive supports? There are so many things that can get in the way. And until those barriers are addressed, the goal isn't able to be reached. Trust me, if it was easy to just be mentally well, we all would be. People don't choose to struggle with their mental health. So when we are having a hard time reaching our goals, a really important question can be, what's getting in the way? Let's stop shoulding all over ourselves. This is all part of what I mean when I say that everything we do has a logic, even if it isn't readily apparent to us. There are reasons for our feelings, actions, and thoughts. And unfortunately, something that often gets in the way is something that we often actually believe is going to help us. And that's shame. There's this myth that shame will be motivating. That if we have the voice of a drill sergeant in our heads telling us that that's the most pathetic display I've ever seen, you better drop and give me 20, that this will unlock our potential and lead us to wild success. Except that's not what happens. Shame is a complicated process within the body, evoking not just a sense of doing something wrong or bad, guilt, but also of being something wrong or bad. And none of the current competing theories of core emotions support shame as being among those core emotions that we're born capable of experiencing and expressing. In fact, we don't start to be able to identify the experience we know as shame in children until they're about 2 years old, which happens to coincide with when most children are developing the ability to walk and genuinely be able to move around and explore independently for the first time. So, picture this. A toddler is at home with their parent, who is in the kitchen making dinner. The toddler is sitting in the corner playing with a toy when the parent is distracted by a phone call. And while their back is turned, the child's attention is caught by an interesting looking object that they can see hanging over the edge of the counter. They toddle over and reach for it just in time for the parent to turn around and see their child reaching for the blade of a knife that has gotten too close to the counter's edge. They shout, "Don't touch that!" And the child freezes. Eyes go wide and fix on their parent. Breath stops, and for a moment, time stands still. And then the child starts to curl in. Their arms withdraw as their shoulders come up and their chin starts to curl in. They might even start to cry as they experience the swell of emotion and shutdown of shame. Now, in this example, shame has done its job for the child. They've withdrawn from the threat of the knife even though they do not yet understand that it is dangerous and have retreated to a safe distance. They don't yet know whether the threat was physical or social, but they have been protected. However, without co-regulation and repair from the parent, they might get stuck in that shame process and be unable to emerge from the shutdown their body is experiencing. So, in the rest of this scene, the parent needs to go to the child and offer comfort. Maybe by rubbing their back and speaking in a soothing tone, and then explain to the child what just happened without blame. So they could say, "I was so scared. I saw you reaching for the knife, and knives are dangerous and can hurt you. They're only for adults, and we're not allowed to play with them. Because I was scared, my voice must have sounded pretty scary, huh? Are you okay? Why don't we go back to playing with your toys?" In this case, the parent is explaining and repairing the rupture that just happened in the relationship and helping the child to understand what happened while mobilizing them out of shame, out of the shutdown and back into mobilization. The trouble is, a lot of us are not shown how to do this when we're younger, and therefore we're not given the tools to navigate feelings of shame and avoid getting stuck in them. That can lead to an experience of toxic shame. Toxic shame is a feeling that you're worthless. It happens when other people treat you poorly, and your system turns that treatment into a belief about yourself. You're most vulnerable to this type of poor treatment during childhood or as a teen. It's an immobilizing force, grilling you about how you're supposed to be doing all of these things that you're not doing, while simultaneously burying you under so much pressure and weight that it's not possible for you to get up and just do the thing. And I think that for a lot of members of the 2S LGBTQIA+ community, toxic shame can be especially prevalent due to the experiences of being marginalized by society. And obviously, this can also apply to people who are racialized, disabled people, fat people, poor people, anyone who exists on an axis of marginalization. It's a form of stress that can often be a form of trauma, teaching you the lie through bullying, depictions in media, and systemic oppression that there is something bad or wrong about you. And frankly, fuck that. It's bullshit, and nobody deserves to be shamed for something that is outside of their control and not a choice. Pride is called what it is because it is an act of defiance against a society that tells us to feel shameful for who we are. We march for our rights and our safety and the ability to have love for ourselves. Every time you fight back against that shame, you are embodying the spirit of those who came before you and tried to make it easier to do so, and you, in turn, make it easier for the next generation. But tangents on how therapy needs to address systemic marginalization and be anti-oppressive to be at all successful aside. Toxic shame is a difficult burden to live with that is often unfairly saddled on the marginalized. And while self-love is our goal, there are a heck of a lot of things getting in the way between toxic shame and self-love. That's why I like to utilize a concept called self-compassion. Author Kristen Neff defines self-compassion like this: having compassion for oneself is really no different than having compassion for others. Think about what the experience of compassion feels like. First, to have compassion for others, you must notice that they are suffering. If you ignore that homeless person on the street, you can't feel compassion for how difficult their experience is. Second, compassion involves feeling moved by others' suffering so that your heart responds to their pain. The word compassion literally means to suffer with. When this occurs, you feel warmth, caring, and the desire to help the suffering person in some way. Having compassion also means that you offer understanding and kindness to others when they fail or make mistakes, rather than judging them harshly. Finally, when you feel compassion for another, rather than mere pity, it means that you realize that suffering, failure, and imperfection is part of the shared human experience. Self-compassion involves acting the same way towards yourself when you are having a difficult time, fail, or notice something that you don't like about yourself. Instead of just ignoring your pain with a stiff upper lip mentality, you stop to tell yourself, this is really difficult right now. How can I comfort and care for myself in this moment? Instead of mercilessly judging and criticizing yourself for various inadequacies or shortcomings, self-compassion means that you are kind and understanding when confronted with personal failings. After all, whoever said you were supposed to be perfect? You may try to change in ways that allow you to be more healthy and happy, but this is done because you care about yourself, not because you are worthless or unacceptable as you are. Perhaps most importantly, having compassion for yourself means that you honor and accept your humanness. Things will not always go the way you want them to. You will encounter frustrations, losses will occur, you will make mistakes, bump up against your limitations, fall short of your ideals. This is the human condition, a reality shared by all of us. The more you open your heart to this reality instead of constantly fighting against it, the more you will be able to feel compassion for yourself and for all your fellow humans in the experience of life. There are 3 core principles that make up self-compassion: self-kindness, common humanity, and mindfulness. Self-kindness is exactly what it sounds like, showing oneself kindness, warmth, and understanding, especially when we suffer, fail, or feel inadequate, rather than ignoring our pain or flagellating ourselves with self-criticism. It means acknowledging that you are imperfect, and that expecting perfection or even near perfection from yourself is unfair and hurtful. Common humanity is the experience of recognizing that we are all human, just like everybody else, and the very definition of being human means that one is mortal, vulnerable, and imperfect. This means that we are never alone in our suffering, and recognizing that suffering and personal inadequacy is part of the shared human experience, something that we will all go through rather than being something that happens to me alone. Finally, mindfulness is a state of being present with and able to recognize our emotions, our experiences, and even our suffering. It also stems from the willingness to observe our negative thoughts and emotions with openness and clarity so that they will be held in mindful awareness. Mindfulness is a non-judgmental, receptive mind state in which one observes thoughts and feelings as they are without trying to deny, suppress, or change them. We cannot ignore our pain and feel compassion for it at the same time. Think about it. If I break my foot and I keep ignoring the pain, saying it's fine and living my life as normal, I'm never going to stop and give my body the opportunity to heal, thereby prolonging my suffering in an attempt to avoid it. If you're paying really close attention, you might remember how at the beginning of this video, I encourage you to speak to yourself with gentleness, as you would a close friend who is going through something difficult. That was a moment of encouraging self-compassion, as many of us find it a lot easier to direct compassion towards others than we do ourselves. When a lot of people start self-compassion work in an effort to move away from feelings of internalized shame or worthlessness, they also express a fear that without that shame and worthlessness, something terrible will happen. Usually this is a fear that they will become a selfish or lazy person without the perceived motivation that shame gives them. Think of the drill sergeant. The thing is that because shame is an immobilizing force, as we've discussed, the research actually shows us that the opposite is true. People who practice self-compassion are able to be more productive and actually identify themselves as having made more gains towards personal goals and growth than those who don't. There are a lot of factors to this, and Krista Neff goes into it in her TED Talk and her books and podcast if you're interested, but ultimately, self-compassion helps us get rid of a lot of the things that get in the way. Remember, Change comes in self-compassion from wanting that change from ourselves, because it will be good for us and we deserve it, rather than from a place where we feel that we need to change in order to access acceptance because there's something wrong or bad about us. And increasing our capacity to show compassion to ourselves also increases our capacity to show compassion to others. Rather than making us more selfish, it grows our capability to experience genuine empathy. So you might be thinking, okay, I'm sold. So how do I do this self-compassion thing? And that's a really good question, because self-compassion is a skill that you have to learn and practice, not something that you're born knowing how to do. So let's look at a couple of exercises that can help you embody the 3 principles of self-kindness, common humanity, and mindfulness. All of these exercises are available for free at www.self-compassion.org. The first one is called the self-compassion break, and it asks you to think of a situation in your life that is difficult and that is causing you stress. Call the situation to mind and see if you can actually feel the stress and emotional discomfort in your body. Now say to yourself, this is a moment of suffering. This is a moment of suffering. That's mindfulness. Other options include, this hurts, or ouch, or even, this is stress. Step 2 is saying that suffering is a part of life. Suffering is a part of life. That's common humanity. Other options include, other people feel this way, or I'm not alone, or we all struggle in our lives. Now, put your hands over your heart, feeling the warmth of your hands and the gentle touch of your hands on your chest. Or adopt whatever soothing touch you discover feels right for you. And say to yourself, may I be kind to myself. May I be kind to myself. You can also ask yourself, what do I need to hear right now to express kindness to myself? Is there a phrase that speaks to you in your particular situation, such as, may I give myself the compassion that I need? May I learn to accept myself as I am? May I forgive myself? May I be strong? Or may I be patient? This practice can be used any time of day or night, and will help you to remember to evoke these 3 aspects of self-compassion when you need it most. It's a quick little reminder to turn your attention inward, reflect on your experience, and meet the needs that your body and mind are expressing. It's good to practice this with the smaller things at first. Think a 3 out of 10 instead of an 8 or a 9 out of 10, so that in a moment where you really need it, the muscle memory will be there. Next, we're going to look at changing your critical self-talk. This exercise should be done over several weeks, and will eventually form the blueprint for changing how you relate to yourself long-term. Some people find it useful to work on their inner critic by writing in a journal. Others are more comfortable doing it via internal dialogues. If you're someone who likes to write things down and revisit them later, journaling can be an excellent tool for transformation. But if you're someone like me who never manages to be consistent with a journal, then do whatever works for you. You can speak aloud to yourself or think silently. So step 1. The first step towards changing the way you treat yourself is to notice when you are being self-critical. It might be that, like many of us, your self-critical voice is so common for you that you don't even notice when it is present. Whenever you're feeling bad about something, think about what you've just said to yourself. Try to be as accurate as possible, noting your inner speech verbatim. What words do you actually use when you're self-critical? Are there key phrases that come up over and over again? What is the tone of your voice? Harsh, cold, angry? Does the voice remind you of anyone in your past who was critical of you? You want to be able to get to know the inner critic very well, and to become aware of when your inner judge is active. For instance, if you've just eaten half of a box of Oreos, does your inner voice say something like, "You're so disgusting, you make me sick," and so on? Really, try to get a clear sense of how you talk to yourself, even though it can be really hard to look at the unkind voices that we may use towards ourselves. Now, step 2, make an active effort to soften the self-critical voice, but do so with compassion rather than self-judgment. Don't say, "You're such a bitch" to your inner critic. It won't work. Say something like, "I know you're worried about me and feel unsafe, but you are causing me unnecessary pain. Could you let my inner compassionate self say a few words now?" We want to be compassionate even towards our inner critic because it is a part of us. Now, step 3, reframe the observations made by your inner critic in a friendly, positive way. If you're having trouble thinking about what words to use, you might want to imagine what a very compassionate friend would say to you in this situation. It might help to use a term of endearment that strengthens expressed feelings of warmth and care, but only if it feels natural rather than cheesy. For instance, you can say something like, "Honey, I know you ate that bag of cookies because you're feeling really sad right now, and you thought it would cheer you up. But you feel even worse, and are not feeling good in your body. I want you to be happy, so why don't you take a long walk so you can feel better?" While engaging in this supportive self-talk, you might want to even try gently stroking your arm or holding your face tenderly in your hands. Physical gestures of warmth can tap into the caregiving system, even if you're having trouble calling up emotions of kindness at first, releasing oxytocin that will help change your biochemistry. The important thing is that you start acting kindly, and feelings of true warmth and caring will eventually follow. Now, I want to emphasize that these are not easy things to do. If they were, we'd all be doing them all of the time, and there would be no need for me to spend all of the time that it took me to make this video. But unfortunately, there's no get-rich-quick scheme for mental health. Taking care of ourselves is hard work, but it's work that we deserve to do for ourselves. And ideally, bit by bit, it can get a little bit easier. If anything I've spoken about today has really hit home, and you feel like you have a lot of questions that you're struggling to find the answers to on your own, I encourage you to reach out and see what mental health resources might be accessible to you in your community. I hope that by showing up here today in my full draggy self, I'm able to help make the idea of therapy and therapists a little bit less scary. I'm a human being, just like you. I'm a drag king who does competitive air guitar and loves karaoke and crying at emotionally manipulative commercials. I've got plenty of my own cringe and flaws, and that's part of my common humanity. A good therapist is going to meet you with empathy, authenticity, positive regard, and understanding. You're not going to be judged. So with that, Thank you so much for having the courage and making the time to join me in Capital Pride for another edition of Drag Me to Therapy. I hope that this was a good use of your hour, and that you're leaving this with a bit more understanding for yourself and your fellow humans. You can follow me and my drag on social media at Cyril Cinder, or check out my website at www.cyrilcinder.com. Stay safe, be kind, and enjoy all of the beauty that this life has to offer you, especially your own. See you next time.